Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to this very special event, which is part of the series of talks celebrating the 175th anniversary of the birth of French Spiritist philosopher Léon Denis. Today, we are joined by Humberto Schubert, who will be talking about Spiritism in the arts. Now, this event has been organised by the British Union of Spiritist Societies, BUS, and is being streamed on both the YouTube and Facebook channels of BUS, as well as by the Irish Spiritist Federation, Kardec Radio, and Kardec Group. So please make sure you give a thumbs up, like, and share this event, and don't forget to follow and subscribe to these channels too. And please let us know where you're watching from so we can say hello to you. Now stick around with us until the very end because we will have a few announcements from BUS as well as a Q&A with Humberto. So let's introduce our guest. Humberto Schubert is a philosopher and lecturer at the Federal University of Juiz de Fora in Brazil. He is a Spiritist writer contributing to various projects, including Projeto Allan Kardec from the same university. Humberto is also coordinating a series of philosophical studies about the works of Léon Denis, and the videos of these are on the YouTube channel of the Spiritist Society of Bournemouth. Now, if that wasn't enough, Humberto is also a co-host with myself and Annie Sinclair on the Kardec Group podcast, Insightfully Speaking. Now, Humberto's lecture today is quite interesting, so if you have any questions, please send them in the comments or chat box, and we will read them out later. But please note we can only see your comments or questions if you are putting them on the channels of BUS, the Irish Federation, Kardec Radio, or Kardec Group, and if you send them during the live event itself. So let's get started and bring on Humberto. Hello, Humberto, how are you?
Hello, Adam. It's a renewed privilege and pleasure to cooperate with you.
It's always a pleasure to have you around in any of the events. So, what can you tell us about Spiritism in the arts?
Well, first, I would like to thank you for the invitation. I would also like to thank Elsa Rossi for the first contact about this speech. And I would like to emphasize that Léon Denis is one of the greatest authors in the field of Spiritist philosophy, also one of the first great authors, and even outside the reach of Spiritist philosophy, he was in his own time a very influential author and thinker and speaker in the sense of the moral solace and support to those who lost the entire families in the First World War or in pandemic crisis in the early 20th century. Well, I will start sharing my presentation. Please tell me if it's working correctly. Can you
Yep,
see it?
I think we should be able to see it now.
Okay. Well, Spiritism in the arts is also much about beauty. Uh, as Allan Kardec, Léon Denis is a philosopher, a popular writer also, and a mystic, we could say, in the positive sense of the word, that is much concerned with the idea of beauty. And he's also committed to preserve the classical idea of beauty. As we can see in this picture, the classic idea of beauty or the classic concept of beauty has something to do with the relationship between man and God. But this is not a symmetrical relationship, since God is always trying to reach us, to touch us, as you can see in the right part of this picture, because God's finger is stretched in our direction. On the other hand, man's finger seems to us a bit lazy, a bit reluctant, and it's up to us to choose to touch God or not, or to remain in our isolation, or consequently in our pain, in our suffering, in our solitude. We can also see this picture as a picture of the duality of beauty from the side of God and from the perspective of man. From God's perspective, beauty is also granted. It is already there in nature. And wherever we look to nature, we see beauty in the starry heaven and in the sky, in the oceans, in the mountains, in the deserts, in the woods. Everywhere, beauty is present in our world. But when we move to humanity, it is also a matter of choice if we are going to produce beautiful things or not. And this is a key part of Denis' understanding of aesthetics and of art. Art is an act of freedom, and it is to some extent dependent on the will of the man, which is not as stable and as universal as the will of God. So we could say that human art can always choose to be beautiful and to reflect divinity or not. It can also choose to remain in the realm of animal concerns or basic social concerns, or in the realm of political acts, or even we can also choose to make absolutely no art at all. It is also in our choice. Well, to understand the classical concept of beauty, it is mandatory to come back to Plato. Plato was the creator of the classical concept as a concept, but he pretty much gathered some preconceptions of the Greek civilization of that time. For Plato, as we may know, beauty is a form of apprehension of the good. Plato speaks much about the good more than about beauty, but when he speaks about beauty, he shows to us a sort of reverence, a sort of worship to the idea of beauty, as beauty was one of the divine attributes, as it was part of what we call God or the sacred. So it is something that we cannot remove from our lives and from our culture without immediately suffering huge consequences, huge negative consequences, because beauty is also the best part of us, the best part of our souls. And in the Phaedrus, for example, Plato said that the souls that are morally superior, they are more perfect in themselves, they are used to, or they are familiar to the gods, or the sphere of the divine. And because of that, moral or wise souls or persons, they are used to the constant contemplation of the divine things, and this constant contemplation also enlightens and embellishes or improves the beauty in their souls, in themselves. So we do not admire bad things for Plato, and this also means we do not praise, we never praise inadequacy, irrationality, disorder, and chaos. A very good example of that is waste. Plato here and there gives this example. It's a recurrent example, as in the text Parmenides, for example. Plato says, well, waste is the ultimate form of ugliness because it has no purpose, it has no specific form. It is actually the fragmentation and the brick of form. And from a beautiful apple, or from a beautiful tree, or from a beautiful vase, we after destruction we come to, as a result, we come to a sort of pointless pile of objects, and that pile of waste arises a very specific disgust in us, because it has no meaning, it has no sense, and because we cannot understand it as something that has meaning, that has a recognizable form, we just reject this pile of waste as useless and ugly. There is no good in waste, so to say. Well, as a conclusion, we could say that for Plato, beauty is not the apprehension in the more sensual sense, but it is the intellectual apprehension of the proper forms of things. So it is a very demanding concept, very specific, but it is also the concept that worked very well for at least 2,300 years, until more or less the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, when we start challenging the concept of beauty and even the concept of art, and we started thinking about a non-concept of art, or a so flexible concept that we could include basically everything. And it turned out very badly. It didn't turn out well, because we ended up with no reference and no criteria. And many of us can very quickly realize that in some artistic presentations of our days, we have completely pointless, random, and definitively ugly objects that people try to present as art, and expect us to pay an indecent amount of money for them. Now, still in the line of Plato, we can see in this kale leaf a sort of order that has to do with mathematical symmetry. It is not perfect symmetry, but symmetry is pretty much there. It's possible to visualize some balance and some sort of correspondence from one side to the other. And this is not only a matter of good engineering, but it is also a way to capture and to represent in one picture the idea of order, the idea of organization, of intrinsic driving forces that are in themselves organized, and we could even say with Plato, rational. Because it's rational, because it's ordered, or because it's balanced in harmony, we immediately identify this leaf as beautiful. Now, when we see a rotten or destroyed leaf of the same plant, we are seeing the same material, the basic molecular and even cellular components of that leaf, but because symmetry is not there anymore, we do not see that as beautiful anymore. People will very rarely judge semi-destroyed flowers or leaves as still beautiful or equally beautiful as the ones that we call perfect, because they are in their proper form, or because they hold some sort of intrinsic balance and intrinsic symmetry or rational order. This is what Plato calls the form or the idea of the things. Everything is essentially a material reflection of a specific idea. The idea of leaf, for example, is here absent. We have the same matter, may have the same cells, and from a nutritious point of view, we may even have the same vitamins and proteins and carbohydrates, and it could be as food still good, but it is nevertheless very ugly because the order is now broken. Well, this tells us a lot about the physical idea of beauty, but not so much about moral beauty, spiritual beauty, or even the more subtle beauty of works of art that include human relationships and human dramas. In order to understand this other level or this other layer of beauty in reality, we need to understand that for Plato, it is still related to the idea of order. So, what is morality, for example? What is virtue? What is reason? What is prudence and decency and dignity? They are all resumed as a way of putting order in our life. So a life full of order, of balance, of structure is more intellectual. It is more spiritualized and intellectualized in the very positive sense that the works of Allan Kardec give to the word spiritualized and intellectualized. And one of the main tasks of the spirits on earth, and I'm not talking about deceased spirits, I'm talking about us as incarnated spiritual agents. One of our main tasks is to improve this world towards perfection of the forms, toward the intellectualization of matter, to give order and to structure matter as best as possible. And of course, it involves reducing waste and recycling, but also improving our architecture, urban environment, or even our countryside environment or our fields. Well, in resume, I will briefly read for you this part. Blaso taught that the intellect or the spirit is permanent, while material forms are transitory, evanescent. They just fade away. So even if material forms are, for a brief moment, beautiful, this moment will pass somewhere, and what remains is a pile of waste or a pile of material, of component that has no meaning anymore, and therefore no beauty in itself anymore. Well, material forms and physical beauty, including the beauty of people or animals are destined to vanish, while wisdom, virtue, moral good, moral excellence, competence, we could also say, never fade away. If we possess spiritual beauty, it remains with us throughout life and after. This is why, as much as Jesus, Plato stressed, according also to his master Socrates, that we should invest most of our time perfecting our souls and not our bodies, not our financial life, or not our careers or our reputation in the more material sense of these words, but we should invest in our souls, in our spirits, because they remain. They will be with us after decades and even after death. So he believed. So, which the most beautiful thing uh, that exists? It is the beautiful soul, because even if material objects can be beautiful, and they are beautiful, usually they are beautiful because they have a semblance of eternal ideas that guide them. And we see a horse that is not a corpse of a horse, but a living horse running, and we praise this horse, and we call it beautiful because it inspire us and it remember us of the idea of an organized creature fulfilling its purpose. But when we remove the soul of the horse or the form of the horse, the matter, the flesh that constitutes it, will very quickly disappear in a very disformed and therefore ugly figure. So the most beautiful thing is necessarily a beautiful soul, a soul that possesses knowledge and virtue, and that acts in a more atemporal way as the gods do. Well, let us reflect about these pictures for a couple of seconds. We have here images that may make us smile. Very few people would cry seeing these pictures. Uh, it is a very beautiful plate of fruits and a very beautiful picture of flowery bushes, and the woman is also not only beautiful in herself, but she's smiling, and because she's smiling, it she produces in our hearts an idea of joy, of harmony, of rest, that of relaxation, that helps us to also feel good. Well, this is the very picture of physical or material beauty. It is something that stimulates our sense of pleasure, of adequacy, of good proportion. But when we come to moral beauty, to intellectual beauty, things are not always so. And instead of smiling, we may be moved to tears. Sorry. This is Caravaggio, Peter's crucifixion, and at the bottom we have a picture of Mother Teresa with many children, uh, which he took care for. And these are not pictures that would usually uh, produce in us or stimulate in us a smile, a sensation of joy in the ordinary sense of this word. But many people, after long contemplation of Caravaggio's Peter crucifixion could actually drop some tears and feel sad, or when we see these extraordinary human beings that care about others and act charitably to others, we are many times reflective, and we may even feel bad about ourselves, about how little we do for the others, how little we care about the others, about our own indifference or lack of empathy or lack of engagement. And maybe because of that, maybe just because it is something very deep, and the material, the concrete acts of love move a very deep part of our souls, maybe because of that we may cry. Now, Plato will say moral beauty is not always as joyful and as pleasant as physical beauty, but we also recognize in these more intense pictures a sort of sadness or drama that can produce a higher feeling, a higher idea, or a higher experience of beauty. Now, we are now in Easter, and it's very adequate to remember of crucifixion and the joyful moment of resurrection, of the encounter between Mary Magdalene and Jesus. And it is absolutely normal and even expected that it moves us to tears. When we come to another unmatched mind, paragon of reason and understanding and intelligence, Aristotle, we have a more evolutive or progressive concept of beauty. Because for Aristotle also, beauty is the apprehension of the good, but not an essential apprehension of the good as for Plato, but the apprehension of the goodness that moves a thing forwards. And it is a very evolutive idea that basically is connected to the perfection, the flourishing, or the improvement, the developing of everything. When we move from the potential or the promise to the full realization of something, be it an intellectual process, an artistic process, or an object like a seed that becomes a plant, and a plant that produces flowers. In this phenomena, in this process of evolution from the potential promise to the full realization, the fulfillment of something's purpose, or something of the goal of a thing. In this process, we identify goodness for Aristotle. And when we identify this sort of goodness, we also identify beauty. It is pleasant to us, it is inspiring, it is admirable to see something flourishing, something coming to its full potential, realizing its full potential. So compared to Plato, it's a more progressive vision, and Aristotle sees beauty in the becoming, not in the thing as an already appropriate form. Well, finally we come to Léon Denis, but we still have to remark that Léon Denis is also a careful reader of the religious traditions. Spiritism is not a religion, but it has much to do with religion, in the sense that, according to the historian Lynn Sharp, Spiritism is a sort of secular spirituality. It is a philosophical way of interpreting spiritual phenomena or religious phenomena, and giving it a philosophical clothing, a sort of philosophical glue for this phenomena. Well, but Allan Kardec and also Léon Denis believed that it was our task as spiritists to understand the religious traditions of mankind as attempts of the divine, or attempts of the superior spirits to communicate or to share their values, their perspectives, their wisdom with us. So it may occur through the teachings of the greatest founders of religions, as the example of Jesus and Buddha pretty well show, or it could happen through more mundane mediums, which are the prophets and everyone basically that is not exactly a teacher of humanity, for humanity, sent by God, but someone that had or has here and there an insight and an inspiration that could be converted to wisdom, or to some fruitful and useful teaching to us. Well, when analyzing the Bible or the Celtic religion, the Druidic religion that Léon Denis worships and loves, we can see that there is also much poetry and lyricism in the way that the old religions describe divine reality, and mixing the classical idea from Plato and Aristotle with this more concrete, poetical, aesthetical insight of the religions. Léon Denis builds in his own poetry, because he's a very lyrical writer. He's very he's much concerned with the aesthetics of his own texts and of his own speeches. When we read him and when we contemplate his works, we will see that he tries to involve us in an atmosphere of beauty. And he also sees beauty not only in the arts, as we are going to talk about briefly, but he also sees beauty in nature everywhere. When he speaks about the great mystery or the great enigma in the world, he aestheticizes, or he lyricizes all his speech, and he presents us a picture where the insects and the grains of dust and the dead leaves on the ground in the middle of the woods, and basically everything has a form of beauty, or deserves to be admired, to be respected in some sense. So it is a deeply ecological understanding of the world, understanding of life, if we could use a slightly anachronistic concept. But I think it is rather fair to use the word ecological view of the world, and also a very religious view of the world. Well, that's much in the line of Plato or Augustine. Augustine also says in his Confessions that we should never hate or despise anything, because anything that we disgust or that we hate or that we despise was actually made by God. And when God made it, when God made this thing that we despise, that disgusts us, or that we do not admit, uh, God not only made it for a purpose, but also enjoyed this being, this creature of Him. So everything and everyone, even in pain or in struggle, even in difficulty, is either physically or morally beautiful, or both. Now we move to the central point of the book, Spiritism in the Arts. What is art? We spoke about beauty and how the classical concept of beauty is very demanding. And we also say that Léon Denis' concept of beauty is the classical concept, and maybe even more demanding than the classical concept of beauty itself. And therefore, it has consequences for art. Léon Denis will not think that everything is art, very in contrary to modern artists, museums, presentations, and society in general. He believes that art includes excellence, includes the perfection of forms, and most of all, art includes a sort of direction of our vision to the divine. It is raising our heads to the stars, to the infinity, to the absolute, and try to contemplate the greatness of God itself. But again, God for Denis is not an alien figure. It is everywhere. It is in nature. It is inside us. So when we reflect the beauty of things, we are also reflecting the beauty of God. We may depict that nature or human scenes, or we may speak about feelings and sentiments, or about very concrete social happenings, and it is all very fine, very well, because whenever we are envisioning reality, we are somehow also addressing the absolute cause of everything, or the primary cause of everything. Well, for Léon Denis, then, true art cannot manifest the bad. This is the only thing that art cannot do. It cannot manifest the bad, nor can it come from a bad soul, someone that is disturbed or in inner struggles, or someone that is in conflict with others, can very hardly produce the higher works of art. We usually say, we like to say, in a dramatized version of the history of the art, that artists are souls in conflict, and that endure many struggles and many pains. And that's true, but they are not as unbalanced and as disturbed as we may think, because art also involves technical excellence, which is pretty demanding. It's pretty demanding in terms of time and investment and patience, and it is impossible for a dysfunctional soul to invest a lot of energy and time and years of practice to perform technique in order to achieve excellence, for example. So the spiritual civilization, the one we are trying to build in Léon Denis' works, is characterized by the acknowledgement of God in all its forms and everywhere, the glory of God, its perfection, and the forms of art have to reflect this deeper reality in a spiritual civilization. The problem is, of course, we do not live in a spiritual civilization. We live in a material world. We live in a material society and a materialistic society, both in the physical and in the moral sense. So what we now call art is very often something instrumental, like dancing rhythms or propaganda, things that are exciting for us, that draw our attention because they are colorful and they blink and they are somehow attractive to the senses, but they do not represent any higher idea or the perfection of anything at all. And therefore, we should not consider it art in the proper sense of the word. It is complete propaganda, and it should be enough. It should be a decent classification for it. It's not Denis' intention to despise that or to say that it has no place whatsoever, but to say that it should not be admired and contemplated in museums, for example. Now, what about the artist? What about the responsibility of all this pretty demanding tasks? Well, as children of God, we are all and everyone, we are all co-creators, capable of conceiving beings with a semblance of light, glory, and perfection. In order to fulfill such a higher purpose, however, the artist has to be in harmony with all the order of creation and infused by the light of the supreme source of creativity. The artist may not be enslaved by passions and inferior concerns. She or he may not be in conflict with others but remain righteous despite the struggles of life. So basically, Léon Denis telling us the artist has to be a stoic. The artist must be a wise soul, a sort of philosopher, a sort of soul capable of administrating all the multivarious processes of life without losing track of reality. Well, this is very typical Denisian, the idea that in this world there will always be trouble and chaos, and even though we shall never surrender to the temptation or collapse in the face of suffering. We could here give some examples. I'm watching now a TV series about John Adams, an absolutely great character and a great orator, a master of rhetoric and also a sort of philosopher, as much as Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. And this moment of American history shows us how art can inspire us to greater things and to acts and forms of behavior that we could not even imagine before being provoked or inspired by them. Well, Léon Denis is an author that tells us much about inspiration and sensitivity. A significant part of all his work, all his many books speak about inspiration and sensitivity and a sort of fine perception of the divine, of higher spirituality, of the depth of life. And just as an example, as an illustrative example, in his book, The Invisible, Denis speaks about the glorious mediumship. What exactly is glorious mediumship for Denis? It is the mediumship of the missionaries, of the greatest heroes of mankind, those who somehow influenced all humanity and produced something good or developed or improved the well-being consciousness of the entire humanity. Of course, he's speaking about Beethoven, about Michelangelo, about Buddha and Jesus, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, about Dante and Shakespeare, about those who achieved such a higher state of inspiration that they could actually see permanent things and produce permanent works of art that will never pass. And after 300 years, we still praise Bach, Sebastian Bach songs and music as a supreme form of art, maybe the highest form of music ever produced. And in the next 500 or 5,000 years, we are pretty sure that it's going to be so. As much as we admire and we praise Homer or Sophocles or Cicero or Dante, after thousands of years or hundreds of years, because they are not talking to the public, they are not talking to the time, they're talking to the immortal part in us, to our spirit. And so these works are immortal in a non-social sense of the word. As observed by the philosopher Immanuel Kant, who invested some of his time describing aesthetics and trying to explain aesthetics and the aesthetic feeling, art is a meeting point or a match point between nature and mind. It is always material. We always use tools and instruments, or we act upon material objects such as marble or canvas. But it is also subjective. It is a product of our minds, of our feelings, of our intentions. So it is a human way, a spiritual way to capture and reproduce in the material world what is essentially true. How should we behave in practice? How should spiritualists of all sorts or spiritists behave in the face of such very deep and very serious concepts of beauty and art? Well, we have to be more familiar with the greatest works of art. This is a very good point to start. We should not believe that it is our task, it is our role to recreate artistic tradition or the history of the arts in a spiritist or in a spiritualist way. It is not so, because this greatest the greatest artists, they are not Christians or Muslim, they are not Hindu or atheists. They are very sensitive, inspired, wise souls communicating something divine, something eternal to us. So it is necessary to educate our generation to appreciate Homer and Dante, Shakespeare and Goethe, Beethoven and Michelangelo. We have to do this again. We have to uh, emphasize the best that humanity created, the best that humanity achieved, because it is the best way to awaken the soul to these eternal forms. Well, Léon Denis, therefore, does not recommend us to link uh, beauty and God only. He stressed that beauty is God, it is the appearance of God, and whoever sees beauty uh, anywhere is actually seeing the face of God or the light of God through that thing. Of course, some forms are more appropriate to allow this light of God to pass through them, and some forms are not that appropriate. But basically, it is a shift or a change in our own eyes, in our own hearts and souls that will permit us to understand the world in a more aesthetical way and to see beauty everywhere. I would like to leave you with this part of the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven when he reproducing Schiller's poem in musical form, uh, tells us, as we may remember, Freude, schöner Gotter Funken, Tochter aus Elysium. Joy, you beautiful sparkle of God, you beautiful divine sparkle, daughter of Elysium, daughter Elysiums, we enter you, or joy, drunk with fire or inebriated with fire, and we enter thus inebriated in the heavenly or in your heavenly sacredness. It is not without sense, without motive, that it is now considered the hymn of Europe. It is a very beautiful song, very beautiful poem that really inspire us, and an example of a form of art that draws our attention to the higher part of ourselves, the higher part of reality. It draws our attention to God and the divine. Thank you so much for your patience. Are you there?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I was trying to find the right button there. Umberto, what a fantastic talk. Thank you so much for providing that to explain about Léon Denis' view of art and how that affects us within Spiritism. And you mentioned there about Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. That's actually one of my favorites. It's fantastic. There's some great versions out there, both instrumental and obviously with the choir. When you hear a great choral version, when it just kicks in, it's a fantastic piece. Oh, you're on mute. Let me just unmute you. Nope, you're on mute.
Sorry. I actually planned to sing it, but in the last moment, I realized that it would be insanity.
Well, I was going to come on singing it myself, but then I thought, no, perhaps not. So before we come to any questions, let's just go to some announcements on behalf of Bus. Let me just bring them up just for a moment. So there we go. So just on behalf of BUS, there's a couple of announcements to give. Coming up in April, on Sunday the 18th of April at 11 a.m., Joka Dalidoni will be talking about the Medium's book, celebrating 160 years of this fantastic piece of work from Allan Kardec. Next Thursday, on the 8th of April, there will also be another live part of the Spiritual Light series of talks with Charles Kempf, Elza Rossi, Nadia Giersis, and Steven Bertozzo, most of whom are watching with us today. Thank you for being with us. Another announcement is that every 2 weeks, for those of you who haven't seen this, the Spiritist Society of Bournemouth and the Poole Christian Spiritualist Church are hosting a series of talks looking at the psychological series of the spirit Joanna G. Angelis. You can easily go to their events on YouTube and Facebook, and they are really good events, so please tune in when you can. And another exciting thing is the next episode 2 of Kardec Group's podcast, Insightfully Speaking, will be launching very soon on YouTube, plus all the main podcast stations. Looking ahead to May, the next Léon Denis talk will be with Roberto Watanabe on Saturday, the 1st of May, where he'll be talking about the problem of love and destiny. And of course, on the 22nd of May, there will be the 8th British Congress on Medicine and Spirituality, Health for the Third Millennium, with Dr. Peter Fenwick, Alexandra Moreira, Tanya Stevanin, Natalie Tolber, Vanessa Anceloni, and Sonia Doy. And that is obviously created by AMI International, BUS, and the British Spiritist Medical Association. And you can get more information about all of these and other events from the BUS website and Facebook pages. So let's go to see who has been saying hello and what questions there are. So we want to say hello to lots of people. Elza, Val, Juliana, Miguel, Marcela, Mariana, Maria, Marquinhos, Leah, Elza Lee, Steven, Maria Claudia, Leandro, Antonio, Florenzo Anton, who's with us. Thank you for being with us. Edgier, our good friend over there. And hello to all those in London, Dublin, Oxford, Stockholm, Lithuania, Fortaleza, Bournemouth, everywhere around the UK, Brazil, and beyond. Thank you for being with us. So we do have a couple of questions here. We have one from Elza, who asks, art is one of the best ways to spread Spiritist philosophy teachings to youth. Why do most of the Spiritist institutions not prioritize these areas?
Very good point, Elsa. I will give you my opinion, my humble opinion about this. I think that first, the primary problem is that we do not read Léon Denis anymore. This is a reality. It is something that we are trying to mend or to heal in the social aspect of the Spiritist movement. The fact that we do not read our classics anymore. If we did so, we would realize that art and beauty actually are central parts of our existence, of our spiritual lives, and therefore we cannot ignore it, and we cannot, in our events, as many leaders unfortunately do, consider this a sort of side dish to fill the gaps between more serious activities, which are, of course, speeches. I'm talking about the speeches. We are pretty speech-centered, and we are pretty much focused on the idea of understanding, of clarification, or even inspiration through words, but not so much in an artistic way. Well, on the other hand, we could also see that we have the art of oratory in the Spiritist movement quite a lot, and it is quite present in our reality. We have many extraordinary speakers, and we have many speakers that are masters of the word, masters of the voice modulation, and they are as good artists as everyone who delights the public. But not always these popular speakers are also very learned in the Spiritist philosophy as well. So it is important not to overemphasize the artistic part of the speeches. A good form of not overemphasizing the artistic part of the speech is to have more emphasis on art itself. And I think that if we had more music and more poetry and more literature, more very high quality literature, we would not feel the need of aesthetical fulfillment that much in the middle of our public sessions, which are destined primarily to consolation or to improve the understanding of the hearers.
Yeah. What's your thought on things like music therapy within centers? Because this is something that we've seen, especially in Brazil. You go to a center and they may have a session of music therapy.
It does make sense as long as we have a spiritual or spiritualistic perspective of the world, of life. So it would make less sense if we think, as many artists and many people nowadays believe, that art is a random invention of human creativity, and you can pretty much make up everything, and there is no more criteria for beauty than taste, and taste is random or culturally, subjectively, relative, and so on and so on. It's pretty much the materialistic perspective about art and beauty. Now, if we have standard and permanent standards and permanent values that guide the criteria of beauty and art, then we can separate and discern good art from bad art. It is not actually so hard to do. It's something that we do almost instinctively if we are not corrupted by these relativistic ideas about art as just everything that you want to do. And once we understand, or once we at least believe that there is intrinsic good in beauty and in art, it makes a lot of sense to link this intrinsic value, this intrinsic good, or this intrinsic virtue to pretty much any other virtue or value, including health or mental health or well-being in general, or joy or happiness and so
Yeah.
on.
So following on from that, our good friend Fabrice down in Bournemouth has given this question. There are many physical and psychological therapies managed through the arts. Does Léon Denis mention anything regarding how art can heal the soul?
I think this is directly linked with the formal consideration about the essential and the even natural or superhuman value of beauty. If we do believe, or if we see that beauty is something related to the higher order of things, the best forms and the best ways of every and each thing or phenomena, well, it's pretty logical and even necessary to consider that we should want and we should work to be surrounded by beauty, to have more aesthetical lives, to have more contemplative lives, uh, and that we should at least try to surround ourselves with the goodness represented by beautiful things, be they natural or be they artistic or man-made beauties.
Yeah. And there's obviously the great expression, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And one thing that a few people commented on is that there's a wonderful amount of beautiful bird song coming from behind you during your talk. And this is one of the great things about when talk to someone who's especially close to nature, with nature in the back garden, you can hear these wonderful birds all the time.
Exactly, it's permanent, and it's something that in roots in our soul in an unconscious way. And C.S. Lewis was a great intellectual, one of the greatest Christian writers of the 20th century. In his Abolition of Man, I believe, he said a lot against the idea that beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Of course, in a positive sense, it is. We choose to see beauty or ugliness, but there is also intrinsic beauty in the forms. So there is intrinsic beauty in health, there is intrinsic beauty in justice, there is intrinsic beauty in joy or in faith or in sacrifice, in duty, in performing one's duty. And Plato and also all the classical the admirers of the classical concept of beauty, as Léon Denis and Kardec are. Uh, Plato is always trying to show us that whatever we call good, we can also call beautiful. And I think this is a very good way to keep track of the reality and the more objective uh, manifestation of beauty. Of course, at the same time, as a parallel process, we have the subjective interpretation of the world, and our moods and our philosophies do affect the way we capture or apprehend this beauty. And if you're pessimistic, or if you're always upset with everything, as some people enjoy uh, being and doing, then you can ignore beauty where it is and see ugliness where it's not.
Yeah. And you mentioned before about rereading people like Homer and Shakespeare, etc. I know if you can get through the Iliad and the Odyssey, then congratulations to you. They're fantastic books, but they do take a while. But they're definitely worth rereading. All of these things, all of the old classic artwork. Even though we're here in this pandemic, we have the opportunity to go and visit museums online. The Louvre has a virtual walkthrough of the galleries, other museums as well. So I think everyone should take time to switch off from things that we don't need and remind ourselves of all these beautiful things that we used to admire so much 10, 15, 20 years ago. So I think we're coming to the end now. Humberto, do you have any last reflections?
Well, I'm happy with what we studied today. I apologize for any lack of competence, especially in language. And for this, I again thank you for your patience.
No, thank you so much. And that's all there is for me to do now, just to say thank you so much to our friend Humberto Schubert for being with us today, to thank all of you guys who've been watching us, to thank Bus for organising this event, to thank the Irish Spiritist Federation, Kardec Radio, Kardec Group for transmitting this event. And we just want to say a big thank you to all of you to ask for that you keep well, you keep safe, and that we'll be back again on the 1st of May 2021 with Roberto Watanabe, who'll be talking about the problem of life and destiny. So please take care, and we will see you all again very soon.